Let's consider the issues of the period in the context of the political parties of the era. Your assignment will consist of the issues of patronage, money, and the tariff. Your assignment in this segment is to consider the terms of the debate on each of these issues, what groups benefit from the various stances, and the likely stance of the political parties of the era based on their constituency. To review, the issues are patronage, money, and the tariff, and the parties are the Republicans, the Democrats, and the Populists. This segment is divided into two videos. One way scholars have explained the political dynamics of this era is by using L. Frank Baum's The Wizard of Oz as a metaphor. The Gilded Age was marked by rapid economic growth, a transition from agriculture to industry, and significant income inequality leading to social unrest. The characters in The Wizard of Oz encapsulate these political issues. For instance, the Scarecrow represents farmers, the Tin Man symbolizes industrial workers, and the Cowardly Lion is William Jennings Bryan, a key figure we'll revisit. Dorothy embodies the Populist Party, while the Wicked Witches stand for industrialists, with the East representing Eastern industrialists and the West symbolizing railroads. The Emerald City is Washington, D.C., and the Wizard is President McKinley. As for Toto, we'll leave that for you to figure out. Continuing with our historical narrative, the move towards industrialization had a devastating impact on American farming. As agriculture became more industrialized, crop prices dropped, plunging individual farmers into debt and eventually leading to the disappearance of family farms replaced by industrial agriculture. The transition towards industrialization had a significant impact on American agriculture. As agriculture becomes more industrialized, with large corporations dominating food production, we observe a downward pressure on prices. This scenario poses a considerable challenge for the independent farmer. Typically, as we have discussed, the farmer begins the season by taking out a loan to finance his crop production. However, by the end of the season, when it's time to sell the harvested crops and transport them to market, the return is less than the initial loan due to declining prices, leading the farmer into debt. Optimistically, the farmer borrows more the following year, hoping to compensate for the previous loss by producing even more. Yet, this increased supply further depresses prices, deepening the farmer's financial losses. This cycle of increasing production and escalating debt continues, potentially culminating in bankruptcy. This predicament primarily stems from the industrialization of agriculture. While the farmer's initial instinct might be to resist industrialization, such efforts are futile against the tide of the United States becoming an industrial nation. This shift signifies a decline in the traditional family farm, replaced by industrial-scale operations. A visit to the Imperial Valley would illustrate this transformation, where large businesses have largely supplanted family farms. The farmer's focus then shifts to the railroads, perceived as worsening their plight by increasing transportation costs annually. The complexity of regulating railroads arises from their interstate operations, making state-level interventions ineffective. For instance, even if California were to regulate shipping costs within its borders, the railroads could impose exorbitant fees beyond state lines, such as into Nevada. This realization leads to the formation of a national party by these farmers, aiming for a more comprehensive solution to their challenges. The Populist Party, initially formed as an anti-industrial entity, evolved into a reformist group, later known as the Progressive Party. Primarily representing farmers, the party focused on addressing various issues, with monetary policy being a key concern. Recall that there were two main standards for currency in circulation, the gold standard and greenbacks. The dilemma arose from a debate over whether to adhere to the greenback system or transition back to the gold standard after the Civil War. Advocates for the gold standard saw it as a means to profit and align competitively with Britain. However, shifting from a flexible currency supply to one rigidly tied to gold, specie, would inevitably reduce the money supply in the economy, causing hardship, particularly to farmers. The question then became, how could the amount of specie, which means precious metals, be increased given the scarcity of gold? Most of the gold was already accounted for, leaving little room for expansion in that direction. The solution proposed was to incorporate silver into the monetary system, suggesting a ratio where 16 ounces of silver would be equivalent to 1 ounce of gold. This concept is known as bimetallism. The idea behind bimetallism was straightforward. By adding silver alongside gold in the treasury, the government could issue more currency and still be tied to specie. This increase in currency supply aimed to mitigate one of the major drawbacks of returning to the gold standard. In fact, the United States would eventually amass a significant amount of silver to implement this policy. In your assignment for this segment, you want to ask yourself what group would benefit the most from this plan and who represents them. Going back to our reference to the Wizard of Oz, you might remember Dorothy's iconic ruby slippers. However, in the original book, her slippers were silver, not ruby. Dorothy travels on a yellow brick road, which metaphorically could represent gold. This clever symbolism captures the essence of bimetallism, the coexistence of silver and gold in the nation's currency system. I'm not suggesting the author had this in mind when he wrote the book, but it does give us an accessible way to remember the dynamics of the period. Moving on to other key issues in the original U.S. Constitution, states were left with considerable flexibility in their selection process of senators because the Senate was originally intended to represent the interests of the state. Generally, senators were selected by the state legislature. By the time of the Gilded Age, the Senate was composed predominantly of individuals with significant wealth and influence, earning it the nickname Millionaires' Club. By the late 19th century, a growing dissatisfaction with this arrangement emerged among various groups, most notably the Populists and later the Progressives. They criticized the Senate for serving the interests of the affluent and powerful rather than those of the general populace. Advocating for a more democratic system, these reformers proposed the direct election of senators by the people as a means to ensure that senators would be more accountable to and representative of the public at large. This movement was part of a broader push for political reforms, aimed at curbing the power of special interests and making the government more responsive to the needs of its citizens. Please proceed to video number 2.